Well, good morning to so many of you. If you don't know me, my name is Jill, and I'm our children's pastor. So it's a little bit different for me to be up here rather than downstairs with all of the fun, controlled chaos. Hopefully it's controlled today. But I just really consider it a deep honor and privilege to be able to serve our families in this capacity. It is just the best part of my week, coming home after Sunday mornings and just sometimes taking a big breath, depending on what happened, but just seeing the lives changed and just seeing, like Pastor Steve just said, like the kids that grow up so fast, and I feel like they just come into our world down there in Commonway, kids so quickly, and then they're fifth graders and leaving us as sixth graders in a blink of an eye. And so, but I just want to say thank you for just trusting me and all of the volunteers that we have to care for and minister to your kids every week. So I've been enjoying getting to share a little bit more about my life with you as I've gotten up here and shared a couple times. And many of you know that this past week was the Delaware County Fair, and if you don't, it just ended last night. 4-H was a huge part of my childhood and growing up, and it was even a part of my dad's, and it's just been a big family event. And so even for the past 10 years, it has been a huge part of my own family's life. My kids have done everything from photography to electric projects to fine arts to showing their pigs and even sometimes showing other people's animals for them when that has been needed. Now, we are not farmers by any stretch of the imagination, but every spring we get a couple pigs, and we have some pigs at our house from about April till July, and it's been a good learning experience for, I would say, all 5 of us, even though my husband will say he never, ever, ever once volunteered to have pigs. That was my idea. My husband and I, we both grew up in farming backgrounds. Our families both farmed in different capacities. And so we thought that was an important lesson that we wanted our families to know and to grow with. And so this was just a good compromise of what we could do. My kids have all learned a lot. They've had some deep, meaningful relationships through their time in 4-H, and they've learned a lot of skills and lessons that hopefully will carry forward with them into their adulthood. So as we have gone through the book of James, we're getting there to the end. I hope that some of the lessons that have been taught this summer have really resonated with you, and really they've resonated with me in different ways in our life. James is just so right there in your face with it, and so I really just have felt challenged, and I hope that you have all felt challenged as well. So when I first looked at the passage from James that I'm going to be sharing about today, I was a little bit intimidated and felt a little bit unqualified, just to be honest with you, because I wouldn't really call myself a patient person, and I don't know very many people who would actually call themselves patient people, so there's that. But then I looked even more, and I don't like suffering, and I know even fewer people who like suffering and would invite that into their lives. But this is an important message that we as believers all need to know, because going through life without heartache or pain is impossible. So many people, even as I look around this room, and I can see people, I can't see all faces, but I know so many people in this room I've been fervently praying for over the last weeks, months, year. And they've been going through some really hard circumstances. People dealing with health problems, struggles with raising kids, problems in their marriage, struggles caring for aging parents, mental health problems, job struggles, death of loved ones, betrayal by people that you once thought were friends. Those are all real things that I know that you can relate to at least something there, or you know somebody who has been facing something there. And I want you to know that whether you're still in that season of struggle or you're not right now, that I see you and I'm standing with you. And I know that there are people out here dealing with very difficult situations that I am not even aware of. And I want you to know and hopefully find some comfort that even though no one else might know what you're struggling with, God sees you. He knows you and he hears your cries. It's because of these struggles that we're going to inevitably face in our times that the message of today's sermon is incredibly important. Perhaps there are people sitting here that might need to hear this today for something that they're experiencing right now. And so if that's you, I hope that the word that I share today will just help minister to your heart. There might be others who are like, I'm feeling pretty good about life right now, and I'd like to keep it that way. Thank you very much. And for those of you, I'm really happy, but I want to encourage you to maybe hide this word in your heart for a time that maybe you need it, or maybe you need to encourage someone else with it. So, without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive into today's passage. It comes from James chapter 5, and it'll be verse 7 through 12. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count it as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. And above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned. Did you notice how many times patience, or the word patient, is mentioned in this passage? Actually, in the first couple verses, 4 times. This was not just something that James was passively wanting to get through to his readers. It was very important to him that his readers knew that this was going to be difficult. I don't think learning to be patient has gotten any easier since the time James first wrote this. In fact, in a world where instant gratification has become the norm, patience seems less and less evident in our lives. The author James, along with other followers of Christ, were waiting, hoping, and longing for Jesus to return. The New Testament actually oozes with references to Christ's return. Over 300 verses, which turns out to be about 1 in every 13 verses in the New Testament, talks about Christ's return. One noticeable tendency, though, is that most often those crying out for Christ's return were people facing difficult circumstances. It wasn't those who had everything going for them at that time. Hard times make us long for Christ, and this was evident in the New Testament too. It is also just an important reminder for us when we lose perspective and think that life here on earth is all that there is. However, we need to be reminded that as followers of Jesus, it is not. Jesus is coming back to make right all that is wrong in this world, all the brokenness, suffering, and pain. In Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27 and 28, it says this, and just as it is appointed for a man to die once, and after that comes the judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. May that be a reminder, and may that be an encouragement to us all, that no matter what difficulty or hardship we are facing, we can rest assured that when we see Jesus' face again, that there will be peace, joy, and freedom. Verse 7 starts us off here, and it says, "Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains." When James tells us to be patient, we all know that that is so much easier said than done. You know this. I know this. Anyone who has been around a toddler knows that this often falls on deaf ears. There have been moments in my life where I've intentionally not asked for patience because I knew what might come if I asked for it in truth. Sometimes when someone's suffering, we just want that suffering to end immediately. We want the pain to disappear just like that. We want to take it for somebody else. We want it to be gone from our own lives. But James is telling us we need to be patient. And that's hard. That's hard, especially if you're a fixer, if you're a doer, and you want to do whatever you can to make it right, and some things are out of your control. And James reminds us to be patient. Last week, Lisa talked about her grandmother. I loved hearing her story about the memories she had with her sweet grandma. And it made me think of some of the own wisdom my grandpa shared with me. My grandpa, Hiley, he grew up on a farm. And in his adulthood, he became a dairy farmer, in addition to farming just ground. Not only was he a hardworking farmer, but his wife, my grandma, was an expert gardener. She could make anything grow. She could just look at it and it would just beautifully sprout up all kinds of things. And I've always strived to be more like that. And if you, just a little bit about me, like I'm a really good gardener in the month of May. After that, you don't really know what you're going to get. But every time I get something to grow and I finish it to the completion, I'm like, my grandma Hiley would be so proud of me. And so, but my grandpa, like I said, he was a dairy farmer. And do you have any people here who have raised livestock or been around livestock? A little bit, maybe. Yeah, some of you know. That sometimes I think extra patience is required when you're working with animals. They operate on their own system. They seem to always have emergencies when it's not in the open hours of the vet, or they like to find the one little spot in the fence that can be broken open, and they just want to poke holes in all of your plans and dreams for the day. So my grandpa, like I said, he was a hardworking man. I believe that the blood, sweat, and tears that he put in as a young farmer, as a young husband and young father, created the very calm, patient, and happy man I got to know as a grandpa. He was the most patient person. He was never in a hurry. Like, we could always be in a big hurry everywhere. I don't ever remember seeing him in a hurry once. Some of my fondest memories were sitting on his lap on Sunday morning before we would go to church with them. And we would sit on his lap and we would read the Sunday comics, or the funnies, as he called them. And we would sit there, and they had a woods, and they lived in a woods, and we would get the binoculars out, and he would try to identify all the birds that we would hear and try to redirect our eyes, and we were like, looking all over the place, no, right there. And he was just so patient with us. He had this little chuckle that he would have, just a silent little chuckle that as my cousin and I would do talent shows, he would patiently never tell us to stop, and he just let us keep going on. My grandpa, though, was very famous for his little one-liners. He had tons. I wish I would have written more of them down because he always had these one-liners. And one of his best ones that we still always quote in my family today is, he said it's found on the mayonnaise jar. Keep cool, don't freeze. Now, I need you to know I did not find this beautiful photo. We found the top of this, but Kevin was able to help me create this into a better looking photo for today because for some reason they don't have a lot of color photos of mayonnaise jars from the 50s and 40s, and I don't know. So I remember being a young girl and not really understanding at all what he meant by keep cool, don't freeze. What in the world did refrigerating a jar of mayonnaise have to do with anything in my life? It wasn't until I was much older that the silly phrase began to hold meaning for me. Don't panic when you're faced with trouble. Don't balk when something is coming your way. Keep a cool, steady head in difficult situations. And helping to keep that little mantra going has helped me in more times than not, because I do want to panic and like kind of freeze in different times. But when I can hear him saying this, it just helps me to remember that if I just stay steady and try to remain patient rather than freeze up, that it's going to go a lot better. James gives a practical example of what being patient meant. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. The farmer waits for that crop. He has to pay attention to the seasons and the weather patterns. And even if you've never set foot on a farm, you can also begin to imagine just how much patience is required in farming. They don't get days off. Farmers don't get days off. You have to be able to trust your gut and to know, okay, right now is the right time to get out in the fields and plant. You can't plant too early because the frost may kill all your crops. You can't plant too late because you have this certain window of a growing season. And most importantly, you need to be able to plant your crops when the right time of the rains is going to come so that your plants will be established and that they will grow. Now, rarely do the rains ever come exactly as would be ideal. Late freezes also cannot be predicted, but the farmer can only control what he or she does with what they know. And they have to have faith that God will bring the rain in due season. You need to be able to keep cool and not freeze when those struggles come, when panic wants to start rising up. This is the key idea I want you to take away from today, is if we can honor God with what we can control, and that we need to trust him with what you cannot. There's a lot of trust that has to happen and a lot of what-ifs that we can never know at the start of the growing season. In a season where the farmer is desperately waiting for rain, it can feel like eternity. So much stress. Their whole livelihood, their whole year is wound up in this crop that's out in the field. And so hard springs are very, very stressful for them. But when they're able to feel peace at knowing that they're honoring God with what they can control and then trusting him with what they cannot, that doesn't fix everything, but it allows you to know that you're doing all that you can with what you can. Verse 8, James goes on to say this: you too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. And then he goes on in verse 9 and he follows it up here with this: he says, do not grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. I kind of wondered why he put this in there at first, and then when you start thinking about it, when we are hurt and struggling and suffering and experiencing pain, it is so easy to lash out at those around us. It is so easy to complain. It is so easy to want to hurt somebody else and find a scapegoat to put the blame on. And I believe that James is encouraging the believers to not grumble against one another because that creates more division and makes you feel more isolated. It makes you feel more alone. And even if you're frustrated with what your neighbor's doing or your husband or your wife or your kids are doing, it's important that when we are suffering, that we remember that we need to be on guard against this because it can make us feel even more isolated, more alone, and like we've been abandoned by others. This is one of those things we can control. This is one of those things we can control. And even if somebody has wronged you in this situation, it's important that we try to just guard our words, guard our mouth, and not allow there to become more of an issue than what there is there. Tim Keller says this. He says, "You will never really understand your heart when things are going well. It is only when things go badly that you can see it truly. And that's because it is only when suffering comes you realize who is the true God and what are the false gods of your lives." I think that's very true. Sometimes we don't even realize really who we are or what's important to us until we start facing some struggles. And that's what rises to the top. And I encourage you, no matter if you're facing a small struggle, a large struggle, no matter what this week holds or what happened even yesterday, that when we recognize who the true God is and what the false gods are in our lives, that we're able to hold on more tightly to the true God. Verse 10, James goes on to remind us that, there we go. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. He was referring to prophets in general, and God was with them in their waiting, all the different prophets. I was starting to think of different people like Moses and Elijah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, Daniel, and even John the Baptist. They all died waiting on the Lord. They were waiting for something better. And whether they saw it in this world or in the next, they clung to that hope. And they knew that they needed to honor God with the things in this world that they could control. They had the patience and perseverance in waiting during difficult times. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to think of things that happened in the past and not remember just how much of a struggle different people have faced. And so I think sometimes just taking a moment and reflecting like, okay, that person was able to get through that. May I have that same kind of perseverance and patience? I think that's helpful, at least for me, to be able to go to reference. But these were different examples. And then he goes on to talk about one particular prophet one particular man in the Old Testament. And he says, as you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. So you count all those people blessed. And you have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Now, I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with Job's story, but if not, I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of the tragedies this man faced. He was described as a man who prospered in every way. He was blameless and upright, and he feared God and shunned evil. He had his family in order. He was healthy. He had his spiritual priorities in order. He was wealthy. He literally had it all. And then Job literally had it all ripped away from him. His health, his wealth, his family. But Job remained steadfast in his faith through his experience and his perseverance. And Job learned humility and great spiritual insight. In Job chapter 42:5, he says, "My ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." See, the whole point of Job's story is easy to miss if you don't keep the ultimate purpose of his life in perspective. How did his story end? See here, it says, what the Lord had finally brought about. Job saw God. Job saw God. That was his purpose. After all he endured, he was able to see God. And Job, if you read through his account, he said all of this was basically worth it because I got to see the face of God. In Job 19, he spends time talking about all the hardship he faced. And I wouldn't even long for one of the hardships that Job faced, let alone all of them. But he lists this whole laundry list, and then he leads up to this. It says, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes. I, and not another. How my heart yearns within me." Job knew that his suffering was not the end of his story. He would see God as a result of it. Job could have approached God with questions of why? Why me? Like, why is this happening? But it seemed that seeing God trumped all else. Perhaps, like Job, we can hold on to hope that even after all that we are suffering and enduring, we can simply seeing God will be enough to sustain us. Even at the end of James 11, we see that James reminds us that God is full of compassion and mercy, even when the darkness is allowed to come. God cannot be unkind to his children. James actually made up a new word that we just read it now and just think it's normal. But like, I guess when he said that the Lord is full of compassion, that was the new phrase. And so when coupled with how James described mercy, he's trying to show the reader that despite all of the trouble, God is good. We need to honor God with what you can control and trust him with what you cannot. That's sometimes hard to swallow when the unimaginable strikes. It's like, oh, these things are really good in thought and word, but when you're actually putting it into practice, it's very difficult. I often struggle in that space of the in-between. What if this just doesn't feel good right now? There's a lot of hurt and pain and sorrow. What do we do when there's a terrible, awful event that happens and we can't even comprehend it? We can't wrap our brains around it. The only way I can cling to hope in these circumstances is to know that if I'm patiently waiting, I will be able to see God. And I will see the God acting through the tragedy, not as the cause of it. Mr. Rogers often encouraged his audience to look for the helpers when trouble strikes. You will always find people who are helping. I think that that's one way that God shows up in tragedies. It is by sending helpers to physically be there in the suffering with those who are mourning. The helpers, I was not expecting to get choked up at this, but the helpers are who honor God by doing what they can and trusting God to do what they cannot. They're being God's hands and his feet, no matter what the situation is like. Sometimes in the darkest, most tragic moments of our lives, God allows us to see some of the most beautiful ways that he loves us. God sends us helpers through gentle nudges, helping hands, warm meals, or even having someone just check in on you. Sometimes, if God is nudging us to do that, we don't even realize how powerful those moments are. But I encourage you, if God is nudging you in some way to care after somebody, to look after somebody, or just to give them a call or just drop something off to them, I encourage you to do it. Because you don't know what kind of ministry it will mean to that person. Annie Dillard is an author and a poet, and she wrote this line that I just keep coming back to. It says this: "You do not have to sit outside in the dark. If, however, you want to look at the stars, you will find the darkness is required." Pain on this earth can only be understood through the perspective of heaven. We are only able to see just part of a journey, part of a story, and we don't get to see the end. No matter if we're seeing the very beginning or seeing something that is terrible and horrible, we need to, for those of us who trust in Jesus, we need to know that any pain and suffering you're experiencing is not the end of your story. It's just part of your journey. I came across this beautiful piece from Ann Voskamp, and I thought it was a beautiful way to also share this sentiment here. She says, "What if Jesus doesn't always take away our pain? Because that would take away a door to access the heart of the way himself that can't be experienced any other way. What if Jesus removed every calamity and cross we've ever had to carry? Would we then be following him only just for comfort and convenience, rather than for intimate communion with him, the one who carried a cross too? What if we are most interested in God taking away pain, when God is more interested in giving to us in the midst of pain? What if there is more than taking away pain? What if God is about giving away to be raised up through pain? What if God's more than a taker, but is actually more of a giver? Is there any word more powerful than giving? Thanksgiving, forgiving, caregiving, kind giving, life giving. Everything that's about giving surely leads to fuller living. I thought that was a really good reminder, at least for me, that in the midst of pain, to look for what God might be helping to give me instead. And hopefully, maybe if you're struggling with something right now, that might be a little bit of encouragement to you too. Maybe you're able to see some way that God is giving something to you. The last verse of our section that we're going to talk about today is one that I think kind of ties it all together here as followers, especially when we're suffering. It says, "Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned." James was actually just echoing what Jesus had taught on the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5:34 through 37. And these are Jesus' words here. He says, "But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no, Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Goodness, let's just pause on that for a moment. What a radical thought and idea. In a world where we see lies spread so quickly that it's hard to tell what is truth and what is not, we need to have this reminder as followers of Jesus. It can be even tricky to distinguish from fake videos, just slants of different things we read. We need to be on guard that no matter what, as far as we are able and as far as we are accountable, that we are speaking truth. And if we say something, we need to follow through on it. Jesus knew how much value and weight we needed and how much value and weight our word would hold. So there's so much pain and so much suffering in our world because people have betrayed others with their words. People have lied to others. People have said hurtful things. And so as followers of Jesus, we need to even remember how much more weight our words hold. And so if we say something, we need to make sure that we are following through on it, keeping our word, keeping our promises, and don't be just flippant about saying things if you don't mean it. I think that's one way people will be drawn to Jesus, if we are people who hold their word. We all know people whose worlds are just crashing and changing right now. Maybe yours is too, because of something that you're walking through. So we can't let the pressure and even the future persecution cause us to get angry with one another, to spill over at one another. Instead, we need to hold on like that farmer waiting for the rains. Hold true to your word. Hold on to your hope and be patient, for all will be worth it in the end. I want you to ask yourself this: can others take what you say as reliable? Can they take what you say as true? Can your spouse take that as truth? Can your friends? Can your church family? Your community? Your coworkers? If so, remain steadfast in that. But if not, maybe you need to ask God to help you be more careful and patient with choosing your words. Is Cliff still here? Cliff. Okay, Cliff, will you come on up? Okay. Jesus knew pain and he knew suffering. He knew betrayal. He knew it more deeply than any of us will ever experience. But Jesus also knew that pain and suffering were not the end of his story. Through his death and resurrection for our sin, he conquered death. He was able to show that the pain and suffering of this world would be traded for freedom of life, eternal with him, where there would be no pain and suffering. The deep pain of this world is only endurable when we fix our eyes on another. So I've got some questions I want you to really think about here for a moment. I'm going to read the questions here, have them up here, but then I really want you to pause and think about specific people, names, places, and just really think about how we can go forward with this. So have you witnessed examples in your own life of people who suffered and waited well? Thinking about those people like Job and the prophets, who have you seen that has waited on the Lord? What kinds of things did they do? Or what kinds of things did they do not do? How has their example changed you? So keeping those people in mind, what would it look like in your own life to establish your heart and patiently suffer. How can you do that in a way this week with whatever circumstances come your way? I want to close our time here with a little bit of a responsive prayer. I'm going to have the words of the prayer up here on the screen. I'll read the words that are white. I'd like for you to read the words that are bolded in blue. And then after service, I want to remind you that if you are in need of prayer, there will be stations set up in both corners with people that are waiting and welcoming you. Lord, we recognize that in this world there will be struggles. We recognize that there may be unexpected pain and suffering that we will encounter. Help us to honor you with what we can control and trust you with what we cannot. Help us to develop the patient endurance that perfects our faith through the trials we face and the way we live. Help us to honor you with what we can control and trust you with what we cannot. Lord, thank you for giving us your word. Thank you that you are steadfast and true to what you've spoken. Help us to honor you with what we can control and trust you with what we cannot. Thank you for the examples of men and women of faith who patiently endured in times of deep trouble. May we be people that stand firm in our faith and endure to the end no matter what we face. For you are a God of compassion and mercy, whose love endures from one generation to another. Help us to honor you with what we can control and trust you with what we cannot. Lord, may the hope of seeing you be so firmly ignited in our hearts that we find comfort and encouragement when all else seems lost. Help us to honor you with what we can control and trust you with what we cannot. Thank you, Lord, for the community and family gathered around that want to serve as your hands and feet when others are suffering. Help us to honor you with what we can't control and trust you with what we cannot. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Have a great week.